So, The Simpsons, 36 seasons, over 700 episodes. A show that first aired in December of 1989 when most of us were either very small children, not yet born, or however you're a certain kind of person who's been watching since the beginning. Genuinely older than you feel comfortable admitting. It's been running for so long that the children of people who grew up watching it have now grown up watching it themselves. It's become a kind of furniture, part of the background noise of English-speaking culture. And because it's been going that long, because it contains that much, all those characters, all those episodes, all those throwaway jokes and background details and contradictory bits of lore, people have had an enormous amount of time to look at it closely, to pull at the loose threads, to ask the questions the show doesn't answer, or answers badly, or answers in a way that raises more questions than it resolves. That's what tonight is, 100 of those questions. Or theories, really. Ranging from the ones that feel almost too sensible to be fan speculation, to the ones that are clearly just someone at 2 a.m. connecting dots that probably weren't meant to be connected, but somehow line up anyway. I'm not going to rank these, there's no winner. It's more of a wander. Through all these years of one family in one town that somehow became the longest-running primetime scripted series in American television history. And if you're here because you're trying to fall asleep, that suits the format perfectly. These are theories to drift through, not to solve. If you're new, by the way, welcome, and maybe hit subscribe if this is the sort of thing you enjoy. No pressure. Now, let's start where the show itself starts, with the family. Here's one that feels almost too tidy to be a fan theory. It's more like something the show has been hinting at for decades without ever quite saying outright. The theory is that every member of the Simpson family is extraordinary, not just a bit clever, not just occasionally competent, genuinely, unusually gifted, and almost all of them have chosen in their own way not to be. The evidence is scattered across the show's entire run, but it stacks up nicely when you look at it all together. Abe Simpson, for all his rambling and apparent senility, was a decorated World War II pilot, an accomplished pianist, and capable of remarkable competence when the situation called for it. Maggie, who can't speak and is technically a baby, has shot Charles Montgomery Burns, defeated a mob hitman, and done things that should be physically impossible for someone who's presumably still in nappies. Marge has demonstrated a genuine artistic talent across multiple episodes. Painting, bowling, nearly every skill she picks up, she excels at immediately. And then there's Homer, the most interesting case of the lot. In season 12, the episode HOMR, which I think is one of the most quietly brilliant pieces of television the show ever produced. Homer has a crayon removed from his brain, a crayon that's been lodged in his frontal lobe since childhood, and without it, he immediately tests at near genius level. He starts reading books. He understands Lisa for the first time. He becomes, in a matter of days, the kind of person he apparently always had the biology to be. And then he puts it back, because being that smart made him miserable. Then there's Bart, who ghost wrote a winning Itchy and Scratchy episode in season 9, has demonstrated genuine creative intelligence across dozens of episodes, and whose entire identity is built around performing stupidity so thoroughly that no one expects anything of him. Which is, if you think about it, a fairly sophisticated strategy. Lisa is the only Simpson who can't seem to turn it off. And the show has made it quite clear across all its episodes that being the intelligent one in a room that doesn't want to be perceived is exhausting and lonely in ways that the others have all found ways to avoid. The theory ends there, and it's not a particularly dark one. It's more of a gentle observation that the show might be, underneath everything, about how much easier it is to be ordinary, and how rare it is to choose otherwise. This one has been around long enough that the show itself has addressed it, which is unusual. Most fan theories get ignored. This one got a response, which is, depending on how you look at it, either a sign that the writers found it interesting enough to engage with, or that they found it annoying enough to want to shut down. The theory goes like this. In season 4, episode So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show, Homer falls into a coma after Bart shakes a can of beer in a paint mixer and it explodes on him. He eventually wakes up, or appears to. But the theory holds that he never actually came out of that coma, and every single episode after that point is a projection of his subconscious mind running the life he was afraid he might not get to live. The evidence people cite is the tonal shift. Before 1993, the show's plots were grounded. Financial stress, school problems, neighborhood disputes, marriage difficulties. After that point, the show starts getting gradually more surreal. Celebrity cameos become more frequent. The plots become more outlandish. Reality becomes more flexible. The theory explains the celebrity cameos neatly. Homer is dimly aware of the world outside his hospital room, hears his family talking about famous people, and incorporates them into his dream. It explains the strange logic of later seasons, and it points to an earlier episode, Homer the Heretic, in season 4, just before the coma episode, where Homer has a conversation with God about the meaning of life, but we never hear what God says. The theory suggests God told Homer the truth about his situation. That conversation is the last real one Homer ever has. The show addressed this directly in a deleted scene, essentially mocking the whole idea, having Homer wave it off, which did not convince everyone, because, as several people have pointed out, that's exactly what a dream would do if it needed to maintain itself. I'm not saying the theory is right, I'm saying the show left the door slightly open. And that's kind of charming, really. This is distinct from the genius theory, even though it draws on the same episode. The crayon storyline in HOMR contains a detail that people often gloss over in favor of the main plot. When Homer has the crayon removed as an adult, we see a flashback to how it got there in the first place. And it turns out young Homer put it there himself. As a child, he inserted a crayon into his own nostril, and it went further than intended. Now, that could just be a gag, but the other reading, to the more interesting one, is that Homer chose to make himself less intelligent before he was old enough to understand what he was doing. And then, as an adult, when the crayon is removed and he spends a few days being brilliant and lonely and alienated from the people he loves, he makes the choice again. Consciously this time. He goes back to Moe, he has a beer, he reinstalls the crayon. There's something in that which the show doesn't explain, because it doesn't need to. The evidence is just there for people who want to sit with it. Homer didn't stumble into being Homer, he chose it. Twice, once by accident and once on purpose. And the purpose, if you watch the episode, is quite clearly love. He wants his life back. He wants his friends back. He wants his family to recognize him. And brilliant Homer, for all his capability, doesn't have any of those things in quite the same way. So he puts the crayon back, and that's the end of it. Not sinister, this one, just a recognition. Marge Simpson has been quietly managing one of the most chaotic households in animated television for the show's entire run, and the show has occasionally remembered to notice how extraordinary that actually is. When Marge picks up bowling in season 3, she becomes near professional within days. When she paints, she produces work that gets her into galleries. When she tries things, she tends to be good at them almost immediately. And she has, across the show's run, intervened in crises, local, familial, civic, in ways that should have earned her some kind of public recognition that Springfield has consistently failed to give her. The most dangerous framing comes from a specific reading of her position. Marge knows where everything is. She knows what Homer is actually like underneath the performance. She knows the town's pressure points, the neighbors' weaknesses, the way to get things done. When getting things done requires someone to hold everything together while everyone else panics. There's also the Who Shot Mr. Burns reading, which I'll come back to in a moment. But the broader theory is simpler than that. The show has been telling us for 3 decades that Marge is the most capable person in the main cast, and it frames it as a supporting characteristic rather than a central one, which is interesting. Because if you just look at the evidence, Marge is operating at a level the show doesn't quite have the vocabulary to acknowledge. Maggie did it. The show confirmed it. Maggie accidentally fired a gun that was already in Burns' possession, and the bullet hit him. That's the canonical answer. But the canonical answer was, by the showrunner's own admission, designed to be unexpected, specifically to avoid pointing at the person with the most compelling motive, which was not Maggie. And if you go back to part 1 with fresh eyes and watch who the show actually builds a case against, the answer is Marge. Burns blocked out the sun. The Springfield citizens all lose things because of this. Bart loses the school, Homer loses his job briefly, Grandpa loses his medication, and various others suffer in various ways. But Marge loses her garden. Her plants die, her specific, personal, carefully tended plants. And the show makes a point of showing us Marge's response. Not Homer's explosive anger, not Lisa's political engagement, not Bart's general mayhem. Marge quietly standing in front of her dead garden, saying very little. The theory argues that the motive the show built for Marge, the garden, the personal nature of the loss, the quiet, controlled rage that characterizes everything Marge does when she's genuinely pushed, is more internally consistent with a shooting than Maggie accidentally pressing a trigger in a confused tussle. I don't think the show intended this reading, but I also think it's the reading the episode earns if you follow the emotional logic rather than the plot logic. Maggie Simpson is treated by every adult in Springfield as the innocent, the baby, the one who is still untouched by everything that's made the other Simpsons complicated. And Maggie has shot a man, possibly twice if you count certain non-canonical moments, has defeated fully grown mob associates, has demonstrated in multiple Treehouse of Horror segments the capacity for extraordinary violence, played for laughs in the way that the show plays most extraordinary things. The pacifier, Maggie's constant companion, the thing she's almost never without, has functioned as a prop in multiple of these moments. It's become something the show uses deliberately, I think. The thing that should signal innocence keeps appearing in scenes of power. The broader theory is that Maggie is simply the most capable Simpson, including all the dark implications of that. She's pre-verbal, which means she hasn't yet learned to perform incompetence the way the rest of the family has. She's operating on instinct, and her instincts, as documented across hundreds of episodes, are sharper than anyone around her seems to notice. The show will presumably never actually do anything with this. It's funnier as a background truth than as a plot point, but it's there. This one's been floating around since the early years of the show, and I find it more convincing the more I think about it. Matt Groening based the Simpson family on his own family. This is documented, and he's spoken about it openly. The father, mother, and two sisters all share their names with real Groening family members. The grandfather, even some of the extended family relationships. The only character who isn't named after a real person is Bart, who is an anagram of brat and is, by most accounts, Groening's comic self-insert. The scrappy, irreverent, underachieving kid who turned out, eventually, to be the one making things. The theory draws on what Bart does with that creative energy across the show's run. In Season 9, he ghostwrites an itchy and scratchy episode that wins an award, and then watches someone else accept the prize because Bart's name isn't on it. That's a very specific type of experience. It's the experience of making something that connects with people under a name that isn't yours. Groening spent years doing Life in Hell under his own name before The Simpsons took off. But the structural experience of being someone whose talent runs ahead of their reputation, who makes things without quite being seen as the person who makes things, that's baked into Bart in a way that feels personal rather than incidental. The reading that Bart will grow up to be the kind of person who creates a beloved cultural institution isn't provable, but it fits. Season 7, Bart sells his soul. One of the most quietly serious episodes the show has ever made, dressed up as a philosophical joke. The setup, Bart sells his soul to Milhouse for $5 on the basis that souls aren't real, and the whole concept is theological nonsense. And then things start going wrong for him. Automatic doors don't open, animals don't react to his presence. He can't fog up glass with his breath, and most unsettlingly, he starts having a recurring dream in which he sees other children sailing peacefully on a lake with their souls, small mirror image companions, and Bart is alone on the shore, watching. The official resolution is that Lisa buys the soul back from Comic Book Guy using her savings and returns it to Bart. He cries. The soul reattaches, the episode ends. But here's the theory. Milhouse sold that soul on. Comic Book Guy got it second or possibly third hand. Who knows what state it was in when Lisa recovered it. The Bart who gets his soul back might be getting back something that's already been handled by too many people to be entirely what it was. And the dream sequence, Bart's dream, is one of the most beautiful 30 seconds in the show's history. Bart on the shore, reaching towards something small and luminous on a boat that's drifting away from him. If the episode is about anything, it's about the capacity for sincere feeling. The soul in this reading is just the part of you that can be genuinely moved. The theory that Bart never fully recovered that is sad, and probably not what the writers intended, but it's there in the text if you want it. This is less a conspiracy theory and more of a structural observation that I think is genuinely true. The Simpsons is officially a broad animated comedy. Homer falls down, Bart gets in trouble, Springfield is chaotic, and nothing has permanent consequences. The show resets at the end of every episode and everyone is fine, except Lisa. Lisa's storylines are not structured like that. Lisa's substitute in season 2 is a piece of genuine emotional drama. A child attaching to a teacher who recognizes her, losing him, and learning to hold that grief. Mr. Bergstrom's departure, and his note, "You are Lisa Simpson," is not a punchline, it's not played for laughs, it lands as the real thing. Bleeding gums. Murphy's death in season 6 is the same. Lisa genuinely grieves. The episode doesn't reset. She carries it. The theory is simply that the writers were doing something different with Lisa from the beginning, writing a character who actually experiences things rather than a character who experiences a version of things that looks like experience but doesn't cost anything. And because the show is officially a comedy, that seriousness gets dressed up in plot mechanics that soften it slightly. But it's there. The reading that sticks with me is this: Springfield is a comedy for everyone except Lisa. For Lisa, it's a drama she can't escape. I want to be clear up front that this is almost certainly not what the show intended. The writers have never confirmed or suggested anything like it, and the whole concept is designed to be the kind of theory that sounds preposterous the moment you say it out loud, and yet the evidence is slightly more interesting than it deserves to be. The shooting episode is the obvious starting point. When Mr. Burns's assailant is finally revealed, his first response, and before anything else, is to say that he doesn't remember meeting Maggie, and that he can't imagine why she would shoot him. That's an odd framing for an accident. It's also odd that Burns knows her name in that moment before anyone tells him. Then there's Maggie's general competence, which tracks with the genius theory but takes on a different shade if you read Burns as her biological father. Burns, for all his physical frailty and general ghoulishness, has survived everything. He is extraordinarily resilient in ways that shouldn't be biologically possible. Maggie, similarly, is resilient in ways that shouldn't be possible for a baby. The motive side of this theory, how it would have happened, what it means for Marge, is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable, and I won't push too hard on it. But the reading that there is something about Burns and Maggie that the show has been gesturing at obliquely for 30 years is not completely without basis. This one sits at an interesting intersection between the show's deliberate lore and its production history. The production history answer is simple. Gabarchupo, who ran the original animation studio, wanted the characters to stand out on color televisions. Yellow skin popped. It was visible. It differentiated the family from everyone else on screen. That's the real reason. But the show's own lore is equally clear that the Springfield nuclear power plant has been leaking radiation into the town's water supply, air, and general environment for decades. Homer has been directly contaminated multiple times. The three-eyed fish Blinky, a recurring character in the show's visual vocabulary, exists because of plant runoff. The town has demonstrably abnormal rates of mutation and unusual biology. So both things can be true at once. The yellow skin was a design decision, and the show built a world in which that design decision was also a narrative explanation. Springfield citizens are yellow because they live in a town that runs on nuclear power and has never prioritized safety regulation. The Simpsons are yellow for the same reason everything else in Springfield is slightly wrong. It's a quick one, but I think it's tidier than it gets credit for. Season 8, You Only Move Twice. Widely considered one of the finest half hours of television the show has ever produced, partly because of Hank Scorpio, a villain who is also genuinely a good boss, and partly because of the ending. Homer quits Scorpio's employ to move back to Springfield. Scorpio, who has just successfully taken over the east coast of the United States, asks Homer what he can give him as a thank you. Homer says he'd always wanted the Dallas Cowboys. Scorpio says he can't manage that, but he'll give Homer the next best thing. Cut to the final shot. The Denver Broncos standing on the Simpsons lawn. The theory is a maths problem, essentially. NFL franchises are worth, in recent valuations, somewhere between $1 and $4 billion. The Denver Broncos sold for over $4 billion in 2022. If Homer has retained ownership of a major professional sports franchise since season 8, and if that franchise has appreciated in value at a rate consistent with the rest of the NFL, then Homer Simpson is worth between £1 and £4 billion, which would explain neatly why the family has never faced actual financial collapse despite Homer's salary, the medical bills, the property damage, and the general economic chaos of Springfield. There's a very large number sitting quietly in the background, and nobody ever mentions it. It's a good theory. It also requires you to believe Homer didn't somehow immediately lose the team or sell it for a sandwich, which is admittedly a significant assumption. And since we're on the subject of things Springfield shouldn't be able to sustain but somehow does, let's talk about Springfield itself for a while. Matt Groening has said more than once that Springfield's location was made ambiguous on purpose. The town was named after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up, but it was never meant to be Oregon. It was meant to be everywhere. The internal geography of Springfield across hundreds of episodes is, by any cartographic standard, impossible. The town has an ocean to the east in some episodes and a desert to the east in others. There are mountains nearby, there's also a beach, it snows in winter and swelters in summer, there's a gorge, there's a forest. There is, at various points, a seemingly endless variety of terrain within driving distance of a single mid-sized American suburb. No real American state contains all of this, which is the point. The reading I find most satisfying is that Springfield is the platonic American suburb, the version that exists in the collective imagination rather than in any specific geography. Everyone who grew up in a mid-sized American town can locate Springfield in their own experience, because Springfield is assembled from the generic parts of all of them. The diner, the nuclear plant, the elementary school with the underpaid teachers, the bar, the church, the crooked mayor. These are not Springfield-specific features, they're American small-town infrastructure. The intentional unknowability of its location is the show saying, "This place is yours. Wherever you're from, this is also where you're from." Groening has been dropping very gentle hints in the direction of Oregon for years, and while he's never committed to it, the case is worth laying out. The name, Springfield, Oregon, is a real city, one that Groening has confirmed inspired the name. It's a mid-sized industrial town in the Willamette Valley, not far from Eugene, with a working-class character and the kind of slightly worn-at-the-edges quality that the show has always captured. The Pacific Northwest geography, the coastline, the evergreen trees visible in certain establishing shots, the general climate behavior, and the type of industry present in Springfield all skew northwest rather than midwest or south. There's also a 2012 interview where Groening told Smithsonian Magazine that the show was set in a town called Springfield, and his childhood home in Portland, Oregon was at the corner of Evergreen Terrace, which is, of course, the street the Simpsons live on. That's not a confirmation, but it's a breadcrumb, and the Oregon theory has more breadcrumbs than any other state. Northern Kentucky has its advocates, so does Vermont, but Oregon is where the trail is warmest. Episode after episode, season after season. Bart is still 10, Homer is still in his late 30s, Lisa is still 8, Maggie is still a baby. Abe Simpson has been roughly 90 years old since the show began. Nobody ages, Nobody changes in the ways that time requires people to change. And yet the show has passed through the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and into the present, updating cultural references and technology while keeping its characters exactly as they were. The in-universe theory that makes the most sense of this is not that the characters are simply animated. We know that, it's not a theory worth having. But that Springfield operates under genuinely different physical laws. Time is not linear there. It is at best seasonal. Things loop. The year changes, but the people don't. There are moments in the show that almost acknowledge this. Treehouse of Horror episodes where characters seem briefly aware of their own immortality. Couch gags that explicitly depict the family as figures in a repeating pattern. The show's own meta-commentary on its longevity in various anniversary episodes, which often has a slightly uncanny undertone, as if the writers themselves find the situation strange. The reading I find genuinely interesting is the idea that Springfield is a place that exists outside consequence. Catastrophic events happen and are forgotten, people die and are forgotten. Relationships break down and are repaired. The town has a structural immunity to permanent change that might, if you wanted to read it cosmologically, be a feature rather than a bug. Springfield cannot be destroyed. It has been tested on this point many times. It hasn't been. Season 6, Homer the Great. One of those episodes that's funny on the surface and genuinely strange underneath. Homer discovers that Lenny and Carl are members of a secret society called the Stonecutters, who have, as they sing in what is honestly a very good song, controlled the calendar, rigged elections, kept the metric system down, brainwashed the masses through television, and decided who holds the remote control. They are the shadow government of Springfield, and they've been operating in plain sight the whole time. Homer joins. Turns out he's the chosen one, destined to lead the Stonecutters by virtue of a birthmark. He immediately makes the Stonecutters into a charity organization. They immediately lose interest. The Stonecutters dissolve. And then, in the episode's final beat, they reform as the No Homers Club. The exact same group, same members, same power structure, simply operating under a different name with Homer excluded. The theory is this: Homer's disruption changed nothing. The power structure reassembled itself around him before he'd finished celebrating. And the show has never really revisited this, which is fine, but the implication is that Springfield's shadow government is still operating. The No Homers Club has been meeting. The calendar is still controlled. The metric system remains deliberately unadopted. It's the show's funniest, most efficient joke about how institutional power survives reformers. Homer Simpson works as a safety inspector at a nuclear power plant. His salary, based on what the show has occasionally referenced, is consistent with a mid-range skilled manual job in the American Midwest. Comfortable but not remarkable. The family owns a 3-bedroom detached house with a yard, 2 cars. They take regular holidays. Bart has attended various expensive extracurricular activities. Lisa has a saxophone that she takes care of. They eat well, the house is well maintained. In any economically realistic setting, none of this works. Nuclear safety inspectors in mid-sized American cities in the 1990s were not buying detached houses, raising 3 children, and holidaying internationally on a single income. The numbers don't add up. The theory isn't that there's something sinister behind this. It's that the show is tracking emotional rather than financial logic. In the world of The Simpsons, Homer's job provides enough because the show needs it to provide enough. Springfield economics are governed by narrative necessity rather than market forces. There is, however, the Denver Broncos explanation from theory number 12, and a theory I find charming that Homer's various money-making schemes across the show, the grease business, the Lucky Jim's barbecue sauce, the occasional prize money, have accumulated into a small but functional buffer that nobody talks about because Homer has forgotten about it. The simplest answer is that Springfield runs on cartoon physics and the family has exactly as much money as the story requires. which is honest at least. This one stopped being a theory a while ago and started being the show's actual sustained satirical argument. Lionel Hutz, who could not win a case under any circumstances and was more likely to make things dramatically worse than better, was the legal representation available to working-class Springfield citizens. Judge Snyder delivered verdicts that seemed to be based on mood and convention rather than law. Fat Tony operated a criminal organization in full view of the police for decades without meaningful consequence. And Snake Jailbird, Snake, who is arrested in nearly every episode he appears in and is back on the streets within what seems like hours, is the clearest expression of the theory. Springfield's prison system processes him through a revolving door so consistent it becomes a visual gag. He robs someone, gets caught, serves what appears to be a very short sentence, and reappears. Nothing changes for him. Nothing is meant to. The reading is that Springfield's legal infrastructure is not designed to produce justice. It's designed to process the poor through a system that maintains the appearance of order while leaving the actual power structures, Burns, Quimby, Fat Tony, the Stonecutters, untouched. The show has been making this argument since at least season 2. It just keeps making it because it keeps being true. Hans Moleman has died, by various fan counts, somewhere between 50 and 100 times across the show's run. He has been run over, crushed, exploded, incinerated, and eaten. He has met his end in ways that would constitute world records for improbable mortality if he were a single continuous person. The theory, and which is charming and I think quite good, is that he isn't. Each Hans Moleman is a different individual. The name is not a name. It's what Springfield calls the person currently occupying the role of small, elderly, profoundly unlucky man. When one Hans Moleman is definitively killed, another steps in. The town doesn't notice because the town doesn't particularly notice Hans Moleman under any circumstances. Supporting evidence, his age is wildly inconsistent across episodes. In one, he says he's 31. In others, he appears to be in his 80s. His backstory changes. He has had multiple incompatible first appearances. The reading I like best is this: Hans Moleman is Springfield's designated sufferer. Every town needs one. The role is just currently occupied by whoever fits the description. Short, unfortunate, wearing thick glasses. It's a title, not a name. It's one of the lighter theories in this list, and I think that's fine. Not everything needs to be devastating. The production reason for the episodic reset is clear. American television in the 1980s and 90s was largely designed for syndication, which meant episodes needed to be watchable in any order. Permanent consequences make that harder, so things reset. But the in-universe theory is more interesting. What if the reset is real? What if Springfield genuinely has a mechanism, osmic, institutional, or otherwise, that restores equilibrium at the end of each disruption? Homer's time travel in Treehouse of Horror 5 establishes that the show's universe is capable of absorbing timeline changes and correcting for them. The Homer as reluctant time corrector theory that he keeps unconsciously dragging Springfield back to baseline gives the reset a character, which is narratively satisfying even if it's probably not intentional. The more grounded version is simply that Springfield exists in a state of permanent cultural stasis that resembles, from the outside, a reset mechanism. The social conditions that produce the chaos of each episode are never addressed. So the chaos keeps happening, so it keeps looking like a reset. Both readings are available, neither is entirely comfortable. This is more trivia than theory, but it's strange enough to include. When Fox aired Who Shot Mr. Burns across 2 episodes in 1995, they ran a contest inviting viewers to submit their answer. The winner would be animated into an episode of the show. It seemed straightforward. Nobody officially submitted the correct answer. The contest drew hundreds of thousands of entries, and not one of them correctly identified Maggie as the shooter. A winner had to be selected from the pool anyway due to contest regulations. And that winner was paid a cash settlement instead of being animated because the winning entry was wrong. There is, however, a footnote. The show's DVD audio commentary mentions that one person did post the correct answer. To the Simpsons newsgroup online the night the first episode aired, the answer was out there in public immediately. But contest rules prevented the producers from contacting this person while the competition was running. By the time it ended, the person had been using a college email account that was no longer active. They'd moved on, summer had ended, the address was gone. The producers put out an open invitation on the DVD. If you're the person who solved it in 1995, please make yourself known. As of this recording, nobody has. There's something quietly lovely about that. The one person who got it right in real time and was never found. A gentle closing theory for this section. The show places Springfield in impossible geography. Ocean and mountain simultaneously, desert and beach within driving distance. Not just because it wanted to avoid committing to a specific state, but because that's how adults remember the towns they grew up in. Memory of a childhood home is not geographically accurate, it's emotionally accurate. The beach feels close because it was exciting. The mountain feels near because it was scary. The distances between things and remembered places are not Euclidean, they're emotional. Close things feel close, important things feel central. Boring things feel far away even if they were next door. Springfield is assembled the way childhood memories are assembled, which is why it feels familiar even if you grew up somewhere nothing like it. The logic of the place is not cartographic. It's the logic of how people carry places inside them. I find that quite a beautiful thing actually for a cartoon to be doing without drawing attention to it. Since we've been in Springfield for a while, let's spend some time in its most significant institution. Not the school, not the church, the nuclear plant. Charles Montgomery Burns is old. How old exactly, the show has never settled on definitively. Estimates across various episodes range from the low 80s to somewhere over 100. And at least one episode implies a childhood memory that would push his birth year into the 1880s, if not earlier. But the more interesting question isn't when he was born. It's what's keeping him going. The theory that Burns is functionally immortal, not supernaturally, but in the sense that his body has developed an immunity to the usual mechanisms of mortality, is supported by a remarkable piece of evidence from season 4. In Homer's triple bypass, Burns undergoes a medical examination, and the results suggest he is in a state so comprehensively diseased that he is, by conventional medicine, already dead. Every known illness is present, and yet they cancel each other out. He's too sick to get any sicker. His pathologies have reached a kind of equilibrium. That's not death, that's something else. Some strange biological detente that keeps him operating while conventional organisms would have collapsed decades earlier. The nuclear plant is part of this theory too. Burns has been immersed in low-level radiation since at least the 1950s. The plant is his domain, his creation, his life's purpose. And the theory that long-term exposure to the plant's particular radiation has produced a biological adaptation in Burns, that he is, essentially, an organism evolved for the atomic age, is no more preposterous than the rest of his existence. The show has given Burns multiple incompatible origin stories, which is standard for a character written by dozens of different writers over its entire run. But if you take the early seasons as canon and look at which historical events Burns refers to with apparent first-hand knowledge, the picture that emerges is extraordinary. He remembers Teddy Roosevelt. He has opinions about the McKinley administration. His childhood, in flashback episodes, is rendered in the visual aesthetic of the late Victorian or Edwardian period. Gaslighting, certain furniture styles, the social customs of a specific American class in a specific historical moment. The 1880s birth date is the conservative estimate. Some fans have pushed it back further, arguing that certain Burns references imply memory of events from the 1860s. This would require accepting the immortality theory from theory number 23, which, given what we have already established about his unusual biology, seems fair. What I find interesting about this is the implications for who Burns actually is. Not a contemporary villain who inherited old money, but a man genuinely formed in the Gilded Age, carrying its values and assumptions intact into the 21st century. Someone for whom the New Deal was a recent irritant, not ancient history, for whom the labor movement is still an ongoing problem rather than a settled matter. That's not just age. That's a walking operational relic of American capitalism at its most unregulated. Homer Simpson is demonstrably, evidentially, verifiably the worst nuclear safety inspector who has ever been employed. This is not a matter of debate within the show's universe. He sleeps at his console, he has caused multiple near meltdowns, he once got his hand stuck in a vending machine and caused a citywide power outage. He is, professionally speaking, a catastrophe, and Burns keeps him. The naive reading is that Burns is simply too out of touch to notice, but Burns is not out of touch. Burns has a surveillance system that covers the entire plant. He has had Smithers compile detailed psychological profiles of every employee. He is not, on any level, unaware of Homer's professional record. The theory is that Homer's incompetence is strategically useful. When the plant has a regulatory inspection, Homer's section fails. The inspectors focus on Homer. They write reports about Homer. They recommend action regarding Homer. And while the Homer problem is being processed, whatever Burns is actually doing in the plant, the financial arrangements, the genuine safety shortcuts, the things that would constitute actual criminal liability, sits quietly undiscovered. Homer is not an employee. He's a lightning rod. Burns keeps him precisely because Homer is so loudly, obviously bad at his job, that no regulator ever looks past him to see what's actually happening. That's not obliviousness. That's strategy. Waylon Smithers has been devoted to Charles Montgomery Burns for the entire run of the show. Years and years of an unrequited, or at best unacknowledged, relationship with a man who barely registers his existence as something distinct from furniture. The show has made this funny, it has occasionally made it sad, and in its better moments, it has made it something more interesting than either of those things. Smithers is not an oblivious man. He's not confused about Burns' feelings for him. He understands with the clarity of someone who has paid very close attention for a very long time exactly what Burns is and exactly what he can and cannot offer. And he stays anyway, not out of delusion, out of something that looks, from a certain angle, like a very considered choice. The theory, if you can call it that, is simply a recognition. Smithers is more competent, more emotionally intelligent, and more capable of functioning as a person than Burns on every available axis. He runs the plant in all the ways that matter. He manages Burns' life, relationships, and daily functioning. He knows where everything is and how everything works and what everyone needs. And he has chosen to spend that competence in service of one extremely difficult man. That's not weakness. That's a kind of devotion the English language doesn't have a precise word for. The show has been examining it across its whole run and hasn't quite found the right one either. Separate from the loyalty reading, there's a specific episode that I think gets at something the show usually dances around. In season 7's Homer the Smithers, Smithers goes on holiday and Burns is left without him. Burns cannot function. He can't make a phone call. He can't operate the coffee machine. He doesn't know how to interact with any other human being without Smithers as an intermediary. He falls apart quietly within hours. And this is presented as comedy. Burns being helpless is funny, but the theory unpacks what that helplessness actually means. Burns doesn't miss Smithers because he loves him. He misses Smithers the way someone misses their left hand. Smithers is not Burns's beloved. He's Burns's capacity to function in the world. And the distinction matters because Smithers knows this and loves Burns anyway. And that gap between what Smithers offers and what Burns is capable of receiving is where everything sad about the relationship lives. Real, unrequited love is usually framed as the love party being unaware or indifferent. This is something slightly different. Burns is not unaware. He simply cannot, constitutionally, temperamentally, respond in kind. And Smithers has made his peace with that in a way that is, depending on the day, either tremendously sad or remarkably dignified. Mayor Quimby is nominally in charge of Springfield. There's a police department, a school board, a city council, and various other democratic structures that suggest an organized civic body with accountable leadership. None of this is where the actual power is. Burns blocked out the sun in season 6, and the consequences for him at the end of the episode were being shot by a baby. He ran for governor in season 2. And lost primarily because Homer told the truth about him, which required Homer to be exposed to raw political nerve in a way he almost never is. He has owned the local media outlet. He has had people imprisoned. He has made and unmade economic conditions in Springfield at will for decades. The theory is not conspiratorial, it's just taking the show's own evidence seriously. Fat Tony operates under Burns' economic umbrella. Mayor Quimby defers to Burns' money, the police respond to Burns' concerns, and the regulatory apparatus that should hold a nuclear plant owner accountable is, as we've established, largely ornamental. Springfield is not a democracy, it's a company town, and the company is Burns' plant, and everyone in Springfield lives inside the economic gravity of that fact whether they know it or not. This is less a theory and more a literary reading, and I want to include it because I think it's what the character was always designed to be. Burns was born, or per the generous readings, in the late 19th century. He grew up during the Gilded Age. He thrived through the Industrial Revolution and the Atomic Age. He survived the New Deal, the labor movement, every regulatory framework that the 20th century tried to impose on people like him. He is, in his own person, the continuity of a certain kind of American economic power. The kind that was already established before the workers had rights and simply adapted its vocabulary over the years, while keeping its fundamental values intact. The show is not subtle about this. Burns talks about unions as a personal affront. He discusses the rights of labor with the bewilderment of someone who genuinely cannot understand why such things should exist. He is not performing ignorance. He is expressing the sincere worldview of a man formed in an era when the question of workers' rights was considered settled, and settled in favor of people like him. The reason he's funny rather than just horrifying is that the show renders him with the slight absurdity of someone whose assumptions are so outdated they've looped back around to being quaint. He's not a contemporary villain. He's a Victorian villain who has somehow survived into the present, where his values make him look eccentric rather than dangerous, which is, in itself, a very sharp observation about how power ages. This one follows naturally from everything we've just established about Burns. The Springfield nuclear power plant has failed every realistic safety standard it has been subjected to in any episode that involves external regulators. Homer has caused incidents that should have resulted in criminal charges and plant closure. The equipment is consistently outdated, improperly maintained, and operated by staff who range from incompetent to actively asleep. And yet the plant keeps running. Burns keeps his license. The incidents are absorbed and forgotten. The theory is that this was never an accident of poor management. The plant was designed with enough redundancy to avoid catastrophic failure while operating at the absolute minimum of genuine safety compliance. Not because Burns is a safety crusader, he very clearly isn't, but because catastrophic failure would be costly and would attract the wrong kind of attention. What Burns wants is a plant that produces power, generates profit, and maintains just enough operational stability to keep regulators focused on the Homer-level problems rather than the structural ones. The plant is not trying to be safe, it's trying to be safe enough. That's a very specific calibration, and it implies a level of deliberate engineering that Burns's apparent buffoonery is, I think, meant to obscure. Season 5, Rosebud. Burns loses his childhood teddy bear, Bobo, and the episode becomes, almost accidentally, one of the most emotionally resonant things the show has ever done. Bobo is an old, worn, stuffed animal. By the time the episode finds it, it has passed through the hands of Hitler, a Nazi Germany submarine crew, and eventually a bag of ice purchased from the Simpsons convenience store. Maggie has bonded with it. Burns wants it back with a desperation that is, for once, not comic or sinister. He wants it because Bobo is the one surviving piece of who he was before he became what he is. The theory, and it's a reading rather than a conspiracy, is that Burns was not always this. He was, at some point, a child who loved a bear. And something happened, not just money and power, though those didn't help. Something in his formation closed off the part of him that could be soft. And he has been performing hardness ever since, so consistently and for so long that he has almost forgotten what he's performing. The episode ends with Burns giving Bobo back to Maggie, voluntarily, in exchange for nothing. Burns' face in that moment is not the face of a villain. It's the face of someone briefly remembering who they used to be and choosing to honor it. I find that rather beautiful, honestly. And it's a good place to leave the Burns section, from the plant's most powerful figure to its most religious neighbor. Let's spend some time with Ned, Season 8, Hurricane Nettie. A tornado takes Ned's house. The townspeople, led by Homer, rebuild it, badly. And Ned, who has spent 8 seasons being relentlessly cheerful in the face of everything Springfield has thrown at him, simply breaks. The speech he delivers is remarkable. He goes through the crowd methodically. Lenny, selfish. Moe, ugly inside and out. Homer, possibly the worst human being Ned has ever had the misfortune to know. He doesn't scream, he's not hysterical. He's calm and specific and completely right about every single person he addresses. And then he is taken away for psychiatric help, and the episode resolves with him feeling better, and the show moves on. But the theory, which the episode actually confirms rather than suggests, is that Ned has been this close to this breakdown for 8 entire seasons, every cheerful diddly-do. Every patient response to Homer's provocations, every moment of Christian forbearance in the face of a neighborhood that does not deserve it. All of it has been holding a door closed against something very large. The door opened once. It was, in the context of the show, treated as an anomaly. But the theory is simply that the door is always there. And Ned has always known it, and the sustained performance of equanimity he's been giving since season 1 is one of the most exhausting things any character in the show has ever done. The Hurricane Nettie episode also contains the origin story, and it's one of the stranger things the show has ever done with a supporting character. Young Ned was raised by beatnik parents who believed completely in permissive parenting. No rules, no discipline, no structure. Ned ran riot, and the behavioral result was, by the show's own admission, catastrophic. He was sent to a child psychologist who spent years applying a new form of therapy called the University of Minnesota Spankological Protocol. 8 months of intense, structured, forcible behavioral correction. And it worked, in a sense. It produced an adult Ned who cannot express negative emotion at all, who processes anger and frustration and grief through cheerfulness, who has built an entire theology around the obligation to be good, partly because the alternative, the thing underneath, is too dangerous to let out. The theory is not that the therapy was evil or that the psychologist was wrong to intervene. It's that the intervention overcorrected. It didn't balance Ned, it created a pressure system. And all those years of sitcom cheerfulness is the sound of that system holding. The breakdown in Hurricane Nettie is not a malfunction. It's the system behaving exactly as pressurized systems eventually behave. Homer is the viewpoint character. The show follows him. His desires and disasters drive most of the plots. But the theory that Ned is the true protagonist, or at least the show's moral center, is worth taking seriously. Every major ethical question in Springfield eventually passes through Ned. What it means to be a good person, what faith costs, what forgiveness requires, what community asks of individuals, and what individuals owe to community. These are Ned's questions. Homer wanders into ethical situations by accident. Ned lives inside them. The show is structured in a way it never quite announces as a decades-long argument between two men who live across the street from each other. Homer's thesis, do what feels good, forgive yourself everything, let chaos be the operating principle. Ned's thesis, do what you're supposed to, hold yourself to account, let structure be the operating principle. Neither of them wins. The street between their houses is the show's philosophical battleground, and it will never be resolved, because it can't be. Both theses contain real truths and real failures. But Ned is carrying the heavier argument. And I think the show has always known that. This theory originated in the No Homers fan community, and it's one of those ideas that seems absurd for about 30 seconds and then becomes oddly difficult to dismiss. The claim is that Maud Flanders, throughout her time on the show, demonstrated a consistent pattern of failing to protect or prioritize Ned during dangerous situations. The bear attack episode, she left. The comet episode, she left. Multiple roof and height-related dangers, she showed no concern. When the show found opportunities to test Maud's attachment to Ned, the results were consistently ambiguous. And after her death, there's a single detail, mentioned as almost a throwaway in one episode, that the imprint on her side of the bed faces away from Ned. She spent every night of their married life facing away from her husband. Now, the show never confirmed this reading, and Maud was clearly written as a warm, loving character in most contexts. And the moments cited above might simply be gags or lazy writing or just the writers not thinking too hard about Maud's behavior in crowd scenes. But if you assume the show was being consistent and deliberate, and in its best years it was, then Maud's behavior across those episodes forms a pattern, not one the show ever addresses. Just a pattern sitting there quietly underneath a character who died before anyone thought to ask questions about her. Maggie Roswell, who voiced Maud Flanders, left the show in 2000 following a dispute over travel expenses. Fox declined to cover her airfares to the recording studio, and she felt the terms were unreasonable. The negotiation didn't work out, and so the writers killed Maud, shot by a t-shirt cannon at a NASCAR event, because that's what was available at the time in the plot. The theory is about what that production decision actually cost the show, creatively. Ned's arc for the next 25 seasons, the grief, the serial dating, the long road to eventually finding peace, the way his character's warmth became tinged with a melancholy that hadn't been there before season 11, all of this emerged from a contract dispute about plane tickets. Ned Flanders' emotional depth, which the show has drawn on ever since, was created accidentally. The grief that makes him genuinely moving rather than just comic. That was a consequence of a business disagreement, not a creative decision. There's something strange about that. The most unexpectedly resonant character arc in the show's history wasn't planned. It happened because someone didn't want to pay for a flight. Art is weird. The show placed these two men directly across the street from each other, and it wasn't arbitrary. Same rough income bracket, same family structure, husband, wife, 3 children, similar ages, same neighborhood, same employer ecosystem, same civic context. The infrastructure of their lives is essentially identical, and they are, in every way that matters, opposites. Homer eats what he wants, sleeps when he wants, does as little work as he can get away with, apologizes rarely and incompletely, and has a more or less permanent condition of being forgiven for everything by the people who love him. Ned denies himself constantly, works hard at things nobody asked him to work hard at, apologizes reflexively and at length, and has spent his entire adult life in anxious negotiation with a God he believes is watching and judging. The theory, which is less a conspiracy than a structural reading, is that the show put these men across the street from each other to ask a specific question. Which of these is a better way to live? And the answer across the whole run is neither, really, but both contain something the other needs. Homer needs Ned's seriousness. Ned needs Homer's ease. They irritate each other constantly because they are each a mirror showing the other exactly what they lack. Various flashback episodes have established that Homer and Ned knew each other as children. They grew up in similar Springfield-adjacent environments. Their lives have been proximate for much longer than the adult relationship on Evergreen Terrace would suggest. The theory, and it's a quiet, observational one, is about the asymmetry in that history. Ned remembers. Ned knows their shared past. He has built his understanding of Homer partly on what he knew of him as a child, and he approaches the adult Homer with a kind of context and history that Homer simply doesn't have access to, because Homer doesn't particularly remember Ned from those early years. That asymmetry, one person remembering a shared history, the other not, is present in every scene they share if you watch for it. Ned's patience with Homer is occasionally explained by faith and theology, but it might also be explained by this. Ned knew Homer before Homer became Homer, and some residue of that knowledge, some loyalty to who Homer was rather than who he is, keeps Ned on the right side of the street. Let's head to Moe's for a while. The show revealed in one of its best pieces of supporting character backstory that Moe Szyslak appeared in Duff beer commercials as a child. He was a minor celebrity. He had a face that was, in childhood, memorable enough to put on television. He was known. And then he grew up, and things didn't continue in that direction. The theory is that this single fact explains everything about adult Moe that is otherwise puzzling or depressing. The bitterness, the self-loathing. The bar that he runs with a kind of resigned competence that suggests he's capable of more but has made peace with not doing it. The constant attempts at reinvention, the brief romance interests, the cooking ambitions, the moments where Moe almost becomes something other than Moe, that never quite stick. Moe started in a place that felt promising. He was on television, people knew his face, and then he wasn't, and they didn't. And the distance between that childhood version and the adult behind the bar is the central wound of his personality. It's not a complicated theory. It's just a compassionate reading of a character the show usually treats as comic relief. Moe is not simply miserable. He is a man measuring himself against a childhood self who made it look easy and finding the comparison painful. No legitimate bar operating on Moe's apparent clientele. 4 regulars, occasional walk-ins, a menu that appears to consist of beer and indeterminate snacks, could sustain itself for all those years in a functioning economy. The numbers don't work. Homer and his friends consume enormous quantities of beer at prices that aren't high enough to generate meaningful revenue. Moe doesn't appear to employ staff except himself. The building should have been condemned in the 1990s based on its visible condition. The theory is that the bar's functional survival is explained by a secondary income stream. Fat Tony operates openly in Springfield and has, across multiple episodes, interacted with Moe in ways that suggest more familiarity than a simple customer relationship. The bar has a basement that is referenced but never fully explored. Moe has demonstrated, on multiple occasions, a knowledge of illegal transactions that goes slightly beyond what a regular barman would need. The reading is that Moe's Tavern is a legitimate business in the same sense that many establishments in communities adjacent to organized crime are legitimate businesses. It handles real customers and sells real alcohol. And it also processes money from sources that nobody at the bar is looking too hard at. This would also explain why Moe's never faces meaningful consequences for its numerous health and safety violations. He has useful friends. This is the most elaborate Moe theory in the fan community, and I want to be clear up front that it is almost certainly wrong. It is, however, more interesting than it deserves to be. The theory involves Professor Frink's time machine, which exists canonically, and posits that Moe at some point traveled back in his own past and took on an alternative identity. He became Barney Gumble. He walked into his own bar. He drank there for years without remembering who he was. The supporting evidence: Moe and Barney have broadly similar physical builds and certain similar vocal qualities. Their backstories contain incompatible but strangely parallel elements. There are episodes where both characters are present, which would disprove the theory entirely under any normal reading. But the theory's proponents argue these are continuity errors rather than disproofs. I don't believe this theory, but the reasoning behind it, the attempt to explain Moe and Barney's relationship through a mechanism that makes their occasional redundancy make sense, is a good example of the kind of creative problem-solving the Simpsons fandom brings to the show's looser seams. It's the sort of thing that's fun to explain at 1 in the morning and impossible to defend in daylight. This one requires some care, and I want to approach it accordingly rather than just listing it and moving on. The show has, across season after season, used Moe's emotional state as a recurring comic device. His loneliness, his low self-esteem, his occasional expressions of being at the end of what he can cope with. These are things the show has returned to regularly, and usually resolved with a punchline or a reset. The theory, more of a reading, is that if you strip the comedy framing away and look at what Moe has been expressing across the show's run, the picture that emerges is of someone who has been struggling for a very long time without much in the way of support from the people around him. Homer and the bar regulars are Moe's community. They're the closest thing he has to a social network. And the show is honest in its way about the limits of what that community provides. They witness Moe's distress. They respond with deflection, humor, or simple inattention. The theory isn't dark so much as it's observational. What the show has been documenting in the background of its comedy is what it looks like when someone is surrounded by people who care about them in a limited way that isn't quite enough. That's a real thing. The show knows it's a real thing, and Moe consistently is the character it uses to show it. Season 7, Saturdays of Thunder. A throwaway scene, not the episode's main plot, but it contains a piece of backstory that sits with you. We see a young Barney Gumble. He was his class valedictorian. He was accepted to college. He had plans, capability, and what appeared to be a functional future. And then Homer handed him his first beer, and the trajectory of his life changed from that moment. The show has returned to this occasionally, not to dwell on it, but to acknowledge it. The sober Barney arc in season 11, where he kicks the drinking and begins making genuinely beautiful art, suggests that whatever was in Barney before the alcohol is still there, accessible, functional, not destroyed, just submerged. The theory draws a line between this and Homer's gravitational pull toward entropy. The recurring implication that Homer doesn't just damage his own life, but influences the lives around him toward a lower energy state. Barney is the clearest example. His entire adult life, as documented by the show, flows from a single moment when Homer introduced him to something that made short-term happiness easy and long-term function very difficult. The show never quite acknowledges this as Homer's fault, but the lineage is there in the writing. In season 11, the show gave Barney Gumble a sobriety arc. He stopped drinking. He made a film, Pocahontas, for a competition against Homer, and it was genuinely moving. It showed that there was an artist inside Barney, a real one. And then in season 12, he was drinking again, off-screen, without explanation. A brief line of dialogue acknowledged the change, and the show moved on. The production reason is fairly well documented. The writers found Barney sober, hard to write. His character's function in the show's comic ecosystem relied on the drinking. A functional, creative, recovering Barney didn't fit comfortably into the Moe's tavern scenes that the show needed him for. The theory is that this decision reveals something about the show's own limits as a piece of art. It was capable in season 11 of imagining Barney differently. It produced an episode that earned that imagining, and then it decided it couldn't sustain it, because sustaining it would require changing too much of the surrounding structure. Barney went back to drinking because the show needed him to, not because his story required it. And there's something worth sitting with in that. Springfield has a church. Reverend Lovejoy presides over it. People attend incompletely. But the conversations that actually matter, the ones where characters say true things about themselves, where the performance of being a functioning Springfield citizen drops briefly, those don't happen at the church. They happen at Moe's. The theory is anthropological rather than conspiratorial. Moe's Tavern functions as the community's confessional. The low light, the drinks, the lack of consequences, the implicit agreement that what happens at Moe's is processed slightly differently than what happens elsewhere. These create conditions for honesty that the show's more official spaces don't provide. Homer tells Moe things he doesn't tell Marge. Lenny and Carl have their most genuine moments there. Even occasional outsiders, characters who come to the bar once and deliver important pieces of themselves, do so in the context of that specific space. The bar works as a confessional because Moe is, despite everything, someone you can talk to. He's not going to fix your problem. He's not going to pretend he has answers. But he'll give you a drink and not look at you too hard, and sometimes that's the closest thing to absolution a person can get on a Tuesday evening in Springfield. The show has been leaving this breadcrumb for approximately 3 decades and has never directly addressed it, which is either extraordinary restraint or a deliberate creative choice to keep the theory alive by neither confirming nor denying it. The evidence: Lenny Leonard has a framed photograph of Carl Carlson in his locker. This was not a throwaway gag. It was shown to the camera deliberately. They have at various points been noted to have matching tattoos. They take holidays together. Their friendship, in its texture and its intimacy, sits in a different register to any other friendship on the show. Carl has described Lenny as the most wonderful person I've ever known. This was said sincerely, in context, not as a joke. The theory isn't that the show is hiding something sinister. It's just noting that the show has been quietly documenting what looks very much like a long-term partnership for decades, and has chosen to leave it legible to people who are looking while never requiring the show to commit to a reading. That's either very careful or very considerate, possibly both. It is, in any case, the longest slow burn in television history, running in the background of a show about a nuclear plant. And if it's true, it's one of the most quietly romantic things the show has ever done. Let's wander across to some of the characters who don't get the main storylines, because some of the best theories in this whole conversation are about people who are on screen for less than 5 minutes an episode. Season 9, The Principal and the Pauper. The most controversial episode in the show's history, and possibly the most philosophically interesting piece of television The Simpsons ever produced by accident. The episode reveals that Seymour Skinner, the man who has been running Springfield Elementary since the show began, who has been defined by his relationship with his mother Agnes, his past with Principal Donalinger, and his position in the school, is not Seymour Skinner. He's Armin Tamzarian, a former street delinquent who went to Vietnam, met the real Seymour Skinner, assumed he was dead, took his identity, and built a life under that name that he then couldn't give back. The reaction from the audience was, to put it diplomatically, not positive. People were furious. Al Jean, who became showrunner shortly after, described the episode as a mistake, and it was effectively retconned. A judge in the episode's ending declares that everyone must continue calling Armin Seymour Skinner, and the subject is never raised again. But the theory, the reading I find genuinely interesting, is that the audience's reaction is the show's most honest moment. What the episode asked was, Does it matter who someone actually is, or does it only matter who they've consistently been? Springfield chose consistency. They wanted their Skinner, not the truth. Armin Tamzarian is the most honest thing the show ever said about identity and nostalgia, and the audience rejected it so completely that the writers buried it. That's a fascinating data point about what people want from their fictions. The standard reading of Ralph Wiggum is that he's a sweet, simple child who says things that don't make sense because he doesn't fully understand the world around him. That's the comedy premise. The theory is the inverse. Ralph's responses are non sequiturs only if you're tracking the literal content of the conversation. If you track the emotional content instead, Ralph is almost always accurate. I bet my Wookiee arrives in a scene of social confusion. My cat's breath smells like cat food is said in a moment of awkward silence. When I grow up, I want to be a principal or a caterpillar is said in a context where everyone else's ambitions are revealed to be empty or unreachable. Ralph is responding to how the room feels, not to what the room is saying. And how the room feels is frequently accurately captured by something that sounds like nonsense in response to the literal dialogue. The theory doesn't require Ralph to be secretly intelligent in a conventional sense. It requires him to be intelligent in a specific way, emotionally rather than linguistically, and to lack the social wiring that would translate that emotional intelligence into conventional responses, which, if you've ever watched Ralph carefully, tracks. Clancy Wiggum is presented as incompetent. He misses obvious evidence. He arrests the wrong people. He is beaten up by citizens he's supposed to be protecting. He is the show's most consistent example of law enforcement failure. The theory is that this is a deliberate performance. Wiggum's relationship with Fat Tony is not the relationship of an incompetent officer who keeps failing to catch a criminal. It's the relationship of two people who have a working arrangement. Fat Tony operates. Wiggum doesn't interfere. Things stay manageable. Wiggum also makes very specific choices about when to be competent and when not to be. He arrests Homer regularly and with apparent ease. He intervenes in bar fights and minor disputes. He is capable of functional police work when the target is someone who doesn't have a protective arrangement with him. The theory is that Wiggum's incompetence is selective. He is terrible at policing things that he has decided not to police. He is adequate at policing things that carry no political cost. And the performance of general buffoonery covers both categories simultaneously, so nobody looks too hard at which column any particular failure falls into. The Krusty is Bart's real father theory is one of the oldest and most circulated in the fandom. I don't think it's right. The show has never confirmed it and has contradicted it in various ways. But the more interesting version of this theory isn't biological. It's about what Krusty represents for Bart and what Bart represents for Krusty. Krusty the clown is what Bart wants to be. Not a clown specifically, but a performer, someone whose chaos is licensed, celebrated, turned into something people love. Krusty does all the things Bart does, the irreverence, the rule-breaking, the refusal to conform, but as a professional, as someone who has found a way to make the city appreciate what everyone else calls delinquency. And Krusty is also what Bart fears becoming. Because underneath the performance, Krusty is alone, self-destructive, commercially compromised, and consistently disappointed by the gap between the life his talent seemed to promise and the life it actually delivered. Bart keeps returning to Krusty in Season 2, Season 4, Season 9, and various other arcs, hoping to find something worth admiring. And he keeps finding the human failure underneath the costume. The theory is that this is a story the show is telling on purpose, about what happens when your hero is real. Nelson Muntz's father has appeared multiple times in the show with incompatible backstories. He's been at a circus, he was lost in a desert. Various family members have made contradictory claims. The theory is that the show is deliberately obscuring a lineage that, if visible, would be too on the nose. Snake Jailbird is Nelson's biological father. The physical resemblance is notable. Similar build, similar facial structure in the show's art style. More importantly, the personality mapping is specific. Both are simultaneously sensitive and aggressive. Both operate in a social context where aggression is necessary and vulnerability is dangerous. Snake, when the show gives him moments of genuine feeling, his car, his girlfriend, his relationship with the neighborhood, is not a pure villain. He's a person whose circumstances narrowed his options. Nelson, in his better episodes, is the same thing. A bully who is also a boy whose situation hasn't left him with good options. The father he'd have in this theory is a man whose trajectory shows where Nelson could end up if nothing changes. The show has never confirmed this, but the emotional logic fits better than the circus. Sideshow Bob has had Bart at his mercy. Multiple times, clear opportunities, isolated locations, sufficient motivation, everything required to do the thing he has organized his entire post-prison life around. And he doesn't. He monologues, he delays, he creates escape routes. Sometimes, obviously, he sings Gilbert and Sullivan until someone arrives to stop him. The theory is that Bob's subconscious doesn't want to kill Bart because Bob's identity requires Bart. Without Bart as the object of his obsession, Bob is simply a very clever, very lonely man with no purpose and no story. Bart gives him structure. Bart gives him meaning. The chase is the point. The show actually confirmed this eventually in an episode where Bob does kill Bart, or appears to, using time travel, and is immediately devastated by the emptiness of it. He revives Bart to kill him again, just to have the experience of almost but not quite. The revelation is built into the premise. Bob doesn't want Bart dead. He wants Bart in a permanent state of nearly dead, where the tension is maintained and the relationship continues. Which is, in psychological terms, a fascinating and rather dark thing for a children's cartoon villain to be doing. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger has a degree from Yale. He has an extensive classical education, he speaks multiple languages, is an accomplished pianist, and has demonstrated a cultural sophistication that sits in stark contrast to virtually everyone else in Springfield. He has organized his entire adult life around revenge on a 10-year-old boy. That's not villainy in the conventional sense. That's a waste of something extraordinary. And I think the show has always been aware of this, has been playing the tragedy of it in the register of farce, because farce is the only register in which it can be examined without becoming unbearable. The Gilbert and Sullivan is the key. There's an episode where Bob is alone in his prison cell singing, and he sounds genuinely beautiful. The voice, the music, the solitary performance in a small cell. It's funny in context because it's absurd, but it's also a portrait of an exceptional person who ended up somewhere very small. The theory is just this. The show has been running one of its saddest character arcs in the body of one of its funniest antagonists, and it has never quite said that out loud. It didn't need to. Jeff Albertson, the comic book guy, has a catchphrase that functions on its surface as a joke about the kind of person who takes popular culture very seriously and has very strong opinions about its quality. But the meta reading is that worst episode ever, and its variants are not commentary by a fictional character about fictional events. They're commentary by a character who is aware of the fictional frame, someone who knows he's in a show and occasionally breaks through the frame to address the audience directly. The comic book guy has an encyclopedic knowledge of fictional universes. By the show's own accounting, he's the most comprehensively informed person in Springfield on how narrative worlds are structured. The theory reads that knowledge as internal. He knows how stories work because he is in one, and he's been paying attention. This is probably just a character quirk being read too hard. But the show has been fairly consistent about letting the comic book guy sit slightly outside the normal Springfield reality, and I think that consistency is worth noting. Automan has been piloting a school bus containing Springfield's children for the show's entire run. In that time, he has never, in any episode, appeared to be in a state that could be described as conventionally sober. The theory, light and fond rather than dark, is that Springfield's physics protect the innocent, specifically that whatever supernatural or structural immunity the town has to permanent consequence extends to the children on Otto's bus, because if it didn't, the narrative of the show would be very different and considerably shorter. There's a reading of Springfield in which the most dangerous driver in the municipal transport system has been safely conveying a school's worth of children for 3 decades, without incident, precisely because the universe has decided that this particular irresponsibility is not the one that gets to have consequences. Otto is, in other words, protected by the same structural immunity as Homer, which raises the question of what Springfield's cosmic risk management system is actually optimizing for, because it doesn't appear to be anything obvious. Agnes Skinner is, in the show's framing, a difficult, demanding, overbearing mother whose treatment of her son is a source of comedy and occasional pathos. The theory takes the behavior seriously rather than comedically. Agnes has, across season after season, demonstrated a remarkably consistent pattern of undermining Seymour at exactly the moments when he has an opportunity to establish independent competence or personal happiness. When he has a girlfriend, Agnes disrupts it. When he has a professional victory, Agnes diminishes it. When he attempts to assert himself, Agnes, specifically, surgically, consistently, finds a thing that deflates him. The theory is that this isn't accidental difficulty. It's structured. Agnes needs Seymour to be a failure because his success would require her to either acknowledge her own limitations as a parent or to lose the one relationship in her life that she completely controls. Keeping Seymour small keeps Agnes central. And Agnes has been doing this for so long with such consistency that it would be strange to read it as anything other than intentional, even if it's not conscious. Groundskeeper Willie has, across the show's run, demonstrated mastery of approximately 40 unrelated skills. He can operate every piece of machinery available in Springfield. He has combat experience. He has survived situations that should be fatal. He speaks the Gaelic and, in one episode, fluent French. The theory is simply a recognition. Willie is, by any objective measure, more capable than anyone else in Springfield's principal cast. He has practical intelligence, physical capability, and the kind of adaptive resilience that comes from having had to solve problems without resources. The show treats him as comic relief because his competence is incongruous, a deeply skilled person employed to cut grass and shovel snow. But that incongruity is worth examining. Springfield's most capable individual is in the most marginal institutional role, and has been for the show's whole life, without complaint, roughly speaking. The reading I like is that Willie chose this. He knows what Springfield is. He knows what the school is. He knows that being the janitor means nobody expects anything of you except the grounds, and he's made peace with that. The competence is his. He just doesn't offer it to people who haven't earned it. Professor Frink has, across the show's run, successfully invented time travel, interdimensional access, a working teleporter, artificial intelligence, and several dozen other technologies that do not yet exist in the real world. And none of them have changed Springfield. The show's standard framing is that Frink's inventions fail, malfunction, or produce consequences that require the episode's reset. But the theory notes that a number of Frink's creations genuinely work, not in a gag sense, but in the sense of accomplishing what they were designed to accomplish. The time machine worked, the teleporter worked, the AI worked in Frinkiac 7 and other episodes. These are canonically functional technologies present in Springfield that have not altered the fabric of life there in any lasting way. The playful conspiracy version of this theory is that someone, the Stonecutters, the federal agency implied in the Springfield Files, Burns Network, is quietly ensuring that Frink's working technologies don't leave his laboratory. That Springfield has been sitting on genuinely transformative inventions for 3 decades, and the reason nobody knows is that the knowledge is being managed. It's a light theory. But Professor Frink has repeatedly invented things that work, and they've made no difference, is a real textual fact. and the conspiracy explanation is at least as good as the narrative convenience explanation. So far, we've spent this whole time inside the show's world. Let's step back for a while and look at the show itself. What it is, what it knows, and some of the stranger theories about the nature of the thing. The Simpsons universe contains Itchy and Scratchy, a cartoon about a cat and mouse that is explicitly the Simpsons version of Tom and Jerry, designed to function as a satire of cartoon violence within a cartoon. The existence of Itchy and Scratchy establishes that the Simpson universe contains cartoons. The theory extends this logic. If the Simpson universe contains cartoons, it could contain a cartoon called The Simpsons. The real Simpson family, or wherever they actually live, whatever they actually do, could be the basis for a show made about them. Just as the Looney Tunes characters are based on the idea of real animals and the Flintstones are based on the idea of a real prehistoric family. This reading explains a few things that are otherwise puzzling. The meta-awareness that the show occasionally demonstrates, the couch gags that depict the family as animated figures, the moments where characters seem briefly aware of their own seriality. Could be moments where the fictional frame becomes slightly transparent. The theory doesn't go anywhere particularly dark, but it does suggest that when the characters seem to be aware of the artifice around them, they might be right to be. From 1987 to 1989, The Simpsons appeared as animated interstitial shorts on The Tracey Ullman Show. The characters are recognizable: Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie. But they're different. The animation style is rougher, cruder, with more exaggerated proportions. The personalities are simpler. The voices are in a slightly different register. The theory is that these are not the same family as the one that appears in the series proper. They are, in the fiction of the show, a different set of people who happen to have the same names and a broadly similar family structure. This is probably not what the creators intended. The shorts in the series are designed as a continuum, but the differences are real enough that the theory has traction. The Springfield of the Tracey Ullman era and the Springfield of the series are two different places, populated by two different families who share enough surface features to be mistaken for each other. The version I find most interesting is the reading that the series is a deliberate refinement, that somewhere between 1987 and 1989, the family we were watching got better, more complete, more fully themselves, as if the early versions were drafts and the series is the final copy. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are officially non-canonical. They're anthology specials set in alternate versions of Springfield. It tended to be separate from the main continuity. The characters can die. The rules are different. Nothing carries over, except that things occasionally do carry over. Certain Treehouse moments are referenced in standard episodes. Certain events from the specials are treated in subsequent seasons as if they happened in a space adjacent to but not entirely separate from the main universe. The theory is that the Treehouse episodes are canon in a specific sense. They represent what happens to the characters when the show's reality management system fails. When the narrative safety mechanisms that keep Springfield functioning, the reset, the structural immunity, the show's tonal contract with its audience, are temporarily suspended. In the Treehouse universe, Homer has died several hundred times. The family has been eaten, vaporized, and dismembered in creative ways. The world has ended repeatedly. And then the regular show continues and nobody mentions any of it, which is either the reset mechanism working or evidence that the Treehouse and regular universes are genuinely separate, or in the theory's most interesting form, that they're the same universe and the regular show is the one in which Homer has been successfully surviving the Treehouse universe events throughout the whole run. The couch gag has been part of the show since the first episode. The family rushes in, sits on the couch, something happens. Early couch gags were quick and simple. The family sits, a joke plays out, the episode begins. Later seasons produced couch gags of extraordinary complexity, full animated sequences, guest-directed pieces, structural experiments that comment on the show's own history. The theory is that the couch gag occupies a different ontological space than the rest of the episode. The title sequence is the show acknowledging what it is: a cartoon, a constructed thing, a piece of entertainment that has rules and conventions it's aware of. And the couch gag is the brief moment where that self-awareness is expressed before the episode commits to the fiction. The increasingly surreal nature of later couch gags, particularly Banksy's 2010 opening, which depicted sweatshop labor producing the show's merchandise, is, in this reading, the show using its one moment of real-world awareness to say something it can't say within the fiction. The couch gag is where the show is permitted to be honest. The rest is Springfield. I want to treat this one carefully because it's a real person and a real loss, not just a production note. Phil Hartman was murdered in May of 1998. He had been a cast member on The Simpsons since season 1, voicing Lionel Hutz and Troy McClure, two of the show's most beloved recurring characters. After his death, the show retired both characters permanently. No recast, no reuse of archived audio. The characters simply stopped appearing, and that was the right call. There's something quietly dignified about the show's refusal to try to replace what he gave those roles. The theory is not that Hartman's death caused the quality decline. The show was already beginning its transition away from the early season's particular magic around season 9 or 10, depending on who you ask. The theory is more specific, that Hartman's energy as a performer was doing something in the writer's room that the show lost along with his voice. Hartman was, by all accounts, enormously funny in the room. His instincts for what made a joke work, timing, energy, the specific texture of how a line should land, were unusually good, and the two characters he played were in some ways the show's most efficient satirical tools. Lionel Hutz was the show's critique of the legal system. Troy McClure was its critique of celebrity, nostalgia, and the recycling of used cultural material. Both critiques went silent after 1998. That's not a conspiracy, it's a loss. And the theory is simply that the show never quite filled those gaps, because Hartman's particular flavor of satire was his, and it left with him. This is documented, not speculative. Homer, Marge, Lisa, and Maggie are all names from Groening's real family. His father was Homer, his mother was Marge, his sisters were Lisa and Maggie. The family dynamic that informed the show's early years drew on real relationships, real personalities, real household tensions. Only Bart, an anagram of brat, and the closest self-insert is entirely invented. The theory is about what that means for the real people. The real Homer Groening, by various accounts, had complicated feelings about being the inspiration for television's most famous comedic disaster of a father. The real Marge reportedly found it more amusing. The broader reading is about the specific intimacy of being someone's creative material. Your personality, your family dynamic, your way of being in a household, transformed into something watched by hundreds of millions of people. Lovingly, but also mercilessly, with enormous affection and absolutely no privacy. Groening has spoken about this with warmth and occasional wryness. But the theory is that the original Simpson family and the Groening family of Portland, Oregon, has been living inside the world's most successful animated show for all this time, in a form that's recognizable to them and alien to everyone else simultaneously. That's strange. That's genuinely strange. The Simpsons passed the natural conclusion point some time ago, when exactly depends on whom you ask. Season 8, Season 10, Season 12 are common answers among people who've thought about it carefully. The show's emotional core stories were told. The characters had been fully explored. The world had been built and examined, and the most interesting things had been said. And then it kept going for another 20-odd seasons and counting. The theory isn't sinister, it's institutional. The Simpsons is now infrastructure. It is a licensing catalog worth billions. It's the primary animated content in Disney's streaming offering. It's global. It's ubiquitous. It has been translated into more languages than most governments have operated in. You can't end infrastructure. Ending the show would require a decision to give up a revenue stream of enormous size, and no corporation has ever voluntarily done that with something still commercially functional. The philosophical question the theory leaves open is that okay? Is it better to exist imperfectly and indefinitely than to end at the right moment? There's no obvious answer. Some beautiful things should end, some should just be there. The show for now is just being there. This is the theory that I think is actually true, and I want to lay it out properly because The Simpsons predicted it framing is so common and so misleading that it obscures something genuinely interesting. This is the theory that I think is actually true, and I want to lay it out properly because The Simpsons predicted it framing is so common and so misleading that it obscures something genuinely interesting. Given enough content, some jokes will land on reality. This is not mystical. It's arithmetic, a show that makes 5,000 jokes about the future of American politics over 30 years will, by mathematical probability, produce some number of jokes that look prescient in retrospect. The Trump presidency in Bart to the Future, Season 11, 2000, was, by the writer's own account, intended as a joke about the logical endpoint of American celebrity culture. The Fox-Disney acquisition was a joke about corporate consolidation that had been widely discussed in media circles for years. These were not random guesses. They were extrapolations of visible trends by people who read the news. The interesting thing about the predictions isn't that they happened, it's that the show was watching carefully enough to see what was coming and turned it into comedy, and people treated the comedy as prophecy because it was easier than taking the satire seriously. Dan Graney, who wrote Bart to the Future in 2000, has spoken about this. The episode depicts Lisa Simpson as the first female president, inheriting a budget crisis from her predecessor, referred to as President Trump. It was, in Graney's own words, meant as a warning about what unchecked celebrity culture could produce. The theory isn't that the show predicted Trump. The theory is that the show warned about Trump, specifically and legibly, 16 years before it happened, in the context of a comedy that people were watching for laughs. And the warning was processed as a punchline. There's something worth sitting with in that. The satire functioned, the observation was accurate, the content was available, and the audience metabolized it as entertainment rather than caution. The show does this regularly, makes an argument about something real in the skin of a joke, and watches the argument bounce off because the skin is too comfortable. The Trump warning is the most obvious example, but it's been happening every season. Season 10, 1998, When You Dish Upon a Star. A background gag shows a building with the sign 20th Century Fox, a division of Walt Disney Company. The actual acquisition of Fox by Disney was completed in March 2019, 21 years after the joke aired. The rational explanation is that the relationship between Disney and Fox was already being discussed in media circles by the late 1990s. Disney had been expanding. Fox was in a position to be acquired. Groening or a writer made the joke because it was the kind of corporate consolidation that seemed, in 1998, like a possible, if distant, future. And it was not prophecy. It was informed extrapolation. The fun explanation, the one that's less satisfying but more enjoyable, is that someone in the writer's room had access to information about the deal's long-term likelihood and chose to encode it as a background gag. That this is, in the tradition of the stonecutters and Springfield's hidden power structures, the show winking at something true. Both are available. I find the rational explanation more interesting, actually. A room of very smart people watching corporate America carefully and making accurate guesses is, in its own way, more impressive than prophecy. From what the show knows about the world to what the show knows about its own characters. Some of the most quietly compelling theories aren't about conspiracies at all. They're about the hidden architecture of the relationships. The early seasons of the show contain a remarkable amount of genuine marriage strain. Seasons 2 through 4 include episodes where Homer and Marge have real arguments about real incompatibilities. His passivity, her suppressed ambitions, the gap between who they both thought they'd be and who they turned out to be. The theory is that the show's original emotional architecture had Homer and Marge growing apart, not divorcing. The show was always going to find a way back, but genuinely exploring what it means to love someone you've outgrown, or who has outgrown you, or who you've simply been with long enough to run out of easy things to say. Separate Vocations in Season 3 is the clearest example. Bart and Lisa swap personalities for an episode, and in the background, Homer and Marge seem briefly to be people who have genuinely different needs that the other can't meet. The network pushed for reconciliation and resolution in every case, and the show delivered it. But the theory is that the writers had something more complicated in mind in the early years. A marriage that survives not because it's easy, but because the people in it have chosen, with difficulty and full knowledge of the difficulty, to keep choosing each other. That's still the show's emotional argument eventually, but it took a few seasons to arrive at it, and the path there was less certain than the finished product implies. Milhouse Van Houten has been in love with Lisa Simpson since approximately Season 1. He has expressed this at various points with varying degrees of directness. Lisa, equally consistently, has not felt the same. The show has given us glimpses of the future in multiple episodes. Lisa's Wedding, Season 6, Bart to the Future, Season 11, and others, and in several of them, Lisa and Milhouse end up together. Not joyfully, not as a romantic triumph, but as the kind of relationship that happens when two people have been adjacent to each other long enough and the alternatives have become sufficiently limited. The theory is that this trajectory, Milhouse patiently present, Lisa eventually arriving at a recognition she can live with, is the show's most honest relationship arc, precisely because it doesn't have the structure of a romance. There's no grand gesture, there's no revelation, there's just someone who has always been there and someone who eventually stops looking past them. That's a very particular kind of love story, one that most people recognize when they encounter it. And the show has been building it quietly across all these seasons in the margins of episodes about other things. The theory is structural. Bart and Lisa were designed to represent opposite responses to the same underlying anxiety. The fear of inadequacy, specifically, of being not enough, not smart enough, not good enough, not the person your family needs you to be. Bart's response is to perform insufficiency so aggressively that no one can hold him to a standard he hasn't set himself. He fails loudly and on purpose so that the failure is his to control. He underachieves before anyone can tell him he was never going to achieve. Lisa's response is the inverse, to over-prepare so completely that failure becomes geometrically unlikely. She tries harder than the system asks, reaches further than anyone around her expects, and converts her anxiety into output. Neither strategy works fully. Bart's performance of failure doesn't protect him from caring. Lisa's performance of competence doesn't protect her from loneliness. They need each other's strategy to complete their own. The episodes where Bart and Lisa genuinely cooperate, and there are more of them than the show gets credit for, tend to be the best of both characters, because together they form something more functional than either is alone. Both Bart Simpson and Nelson Muntz are boys defined by a difficult relationship with authority and a social role that involves some degree of aggression. They are friends sometimes, enemies sometimes. The show has occasionally used them as mirrors. The theory is that the show was always aware of what separated them. Marge, specifically the presence of a parent who is consistently engaged, consistently available, and consistently unwilling to give up. Nelson's mother is absent, or functionally absent. His father, by whichever theory you prefer, is not a stable presence. Nelson's aggression is the behavior of a child with no container for his energy, nowhere to deposit the intensity of being 11 years old without direction or support. Bart, with the same energy, the same irreverence, the same structural tendency toward chaos, has Homer and Marge. Homer's parenting is inconsistent at best, but Marge is there. And Marge is enough, just barely, to keep Bart from becoming Nelson. The theory doesn't require Nelson to be a lost cause. It requires the show to be honest about what structure does for a child, which it is in this particular pairing quite consistently. Season 1, Moaning Lisa. Lisa is sad and can't explain why. She goes out at night and finds a man playing saxophone on a bridge, and he doesn't try to fix her sadness. He doesn't ask her to stop. He plays with her in the key of her sadness and acknowledges that the feeling is real and valid. That's all, but in the context of Lisa's emotional life in the show, where her intelligence and seriousness are usually either praised in the abstract or gently managed, it's something extraordinary. Someone met her where she was. Bleeding gums. Murphy appears in 6 seasons before dying in season 6. His death is the first time the show makes Lisa grieve in a way that isn't resolved by the episode's end. She cries at his memorial performance. She plays for him. The grief is real. The theory is that Murphy and Lisa's relationship was built carefully across 5 seasons to be the show's most genuine, non-family emotional bond, and that the show used it to make an argument about the specific loneliness of being an exceptional child. The way such children find their real kin, not in classrooms or households, but in brief, luminous encounters with adults who are exceptional themselves and recognize something in the child that others miss. Murphy saw Lisa, the show let her lose him, and that grief is still there in any episode that pays attention. Krusty the Clown is beloved. Every child in Springfield watches his show. Bart's devotion to Krusty is the most consistent relationship the show has established for him. And Krusty is, behind the costume and the makeup and the cigarette and the prescription bottles, deeply unhappy in ways that the performance has never resolved. The theory is that the show is using Krusty to make a specific argument about fame, not the kind of fame that comes from talent and deserving, but the kind that comes from performance and consistency, from showing up in the same costume for decades and being the same character and delivering the same laughs. Krusty is loved, but he is loved for the performance. The man inside the performance, with his complicated relationship to his father, his rabbi's disappointment, his self-destructive habits, his succession of failed schemes and bad marriages, is not the object of anyone's devotion. The costume is, and Krusty knows this. The show has never quite let him not know it. He can't take the makeup off in a way that makes the love stay. The love is conditional on the face. That's a very specific, accurate thing to know about fame, and the show has been exploring it through this character throughout its whole run. Marion Anthony D'Amico, Fat Tony, wears the same suit, has the same speech patterns, operates by a code of honor that hasn't been formally observed in organized crime since approximately the Eisenhower administration. The theory is that Fat Tony is not simply old-fashioned. He is deliberately, consciously inhabiting an aesthetic and a value system that belongs to a specific historical moment, because that moment is the one in which his identity was formed and he has declined to update it. This makes him, in a specific way, the same as Disco Stew, another Springfield resident who has committed absolutely to a cultural moment that passed decades ago and sees no reason to revise the commitment. Both characters are frozen in time. Both have found a way to make that freezing functional rather than pathetic. The difference is that Disco Stew's moment was the late 1970s, and Fat Tony's was the early post-war mob era, and the relative cultural weight of those reference points gives Fat Tony a dignity that Disco Stew lacks. He's not anachronistic in a funny way. He's anachronistic in a way that commands a certain respect, or at least Springfield's version of respect, which involves not looking too directly at him and paying your protection money on time. We've touched on Maude in the Ned section, but the theory here is slightly different. It's about what her death did to the show's tone rather than to Ned's character specifically. Before season 11, The Simpsons operated with the understanding that its world was fundamentally safe. Characters could be in danger, relationships could be strained, things could go very wrong. But the core cast was protected. The world they inhabited was, in its deepest structure, one in which nothing permanent would happen. Maude's death broke that. Not dramatically. It was handled briskly, and Ned's grief was processed across subsequent seasons in a way that the show clearly found difficult to sustain. But the fact remained. Someone from the show's established world was gone and wasn't coming back, and this was addressed rather than simply reset. The theory is that this changed what the show was capable of slightly. It introduced a register of genuine loss that hadn't previously been available. And subsequent seasons, Ned's melancholy, the occasional episodes that touch on mortality, the way certain later storylines acknowledge that time has passed even if the characters haven't aged, draw on that register in ways that weren't possible before it was opened. Maude's death, handled as a production necessity, accidentally gave the show a new emotional key. The theory is one of the gentler ones in this entire conversation, and I find it rather lovely. Background characters in The Simpsons, the sea captain, Disco Stew, the crazy cat lady, the old Jewish man, Sideshow Mel, appear regularly enough across hundreds of episodes that, if you watch the show in order and pay attention to their background behavior, you can track something that functions like unofficial character development. The sea captain's relationship to the sea changes slightly over the seasons. The crazy cat lady situation has a trajectory that's visible if you look for it. Sideshow Mel's complicated dignity, he's a man with a bone through his hair who's clearly more competent than his role requires, is consistent enough across 25 seasons to constitute a characterization. The show never drew attention to this. It never said, here is the arc of the sea captain's relationship to his profession. But the consistency was there, episode by episode in the margins. The theory is that this is what the show was always doing at its best. Building a world so completely that the people in the background have inner lives even if no episode ever focused on them. Springfield is populated, not with props, with people who have been quietly somewhere while the main cast was elsewhere. This is the most literary theory in this section and possibly in the whole list, and I want to end here because I think it's genuinely true. Homer is the fear of irrelevance, of trying your best in a limited way and having it be a joke, of being insufficient for the life you've been handed. Marge is the fear of being overlooked, of having more to offer than the situation permits, of love that is complete and not quite enough. Lisa is the fear of being too much, too smart, too serious, too far ahead of the room to be comfortable in it. Bart is the fear of failure, disguised as not caring, but underneath it, terrified of the expectation. Burns is the fear of death, raging against it with money and power and an absolute refusal to accept limitation. Ned is the fear of being bad, of the self that exists underneath the performance of goodness. Moe is the fear of being unlovable, of having tried in your own way and it not having worked. Springfield works as a setting not because it's a place, but because it's an emotional map. You can find yourself in it, almost everyone can. Because the fears it's cataloging are the fears that are common to being a person, and the show has been running them through the prism of a yellow cartoon family across all these seasons without ever explicitly announcing that that's what it's doing. We're into the stranger ones now, the theories that are less about character psychology and more about the show's cosmology. What kind of universe Springfield exists in, and what that means. The theory steps back from the show's immediate foreground and asks a question about the background. What kind of America is Springfield in? The answer, if you look at the evidence carefully, is an America that has already been through something. The nuclear plant isn't new infrastructure. It's been operating for long enough that its effects are fully embedded in the town's biology. Blinky, the three-eyed fish, is not an anomaly. He's a symptom of a long-running condition. The yellow skin of the residents, the unusual rates of mutation visible in various episodes, the strange wildlife, the water quality, these are consistent with a community that has been absorbing low-level radioactive contamination for generations. The theory extends this: Springfield isn't just near a nuclear plant. It was selected for the plant because it was already in a compromised zone. The post-World War II atomic testing programs, the Cold War infrastructure, the industrial sacrifice of certain American communities in the name of national energy production. Springfield is a casualty of that history, and the plant is just the most recent layer. Nothing in this is conspiratorial exactly. It's just taking the show's own background details seriously and asking what they imply about the world they're embedded in. Following naturally from theory number 79, if Springfield has been in a zone of chronic low-level contamination for generations, then the current population is the generation that survived the adaptation. The residents who couldn't tolerate Springfield's environmental conditions have presumably left, or worse. The ones who remain are, in some biological sense, suited to this particular environment. This would explain some things that otherwise require the comedy excuse. Homer's extraordinary physical resilience, surviving car accidents, explosions, falls, and medical events that would be fatal to a normal human being, reads differently if Homer is a person whose body has developed abnormal tolerance to physical insult as part of a broader biological adaptation. The yellow skin is the most visible marker, but the theory suggests it's not the only one. Springfield's residents are subtly, systematically different from people who didn't grow up in that specific environment, and the show is simply depicting them in their natural habitat, without explaining what made them this way because they don't know either. Various fan compilations have attempted to count the number of times Homer Simpson has survived events that should, by any reasonable physical standard, have been fatal. The number, depending on how you define should be fatal, is somewhere between 50 and several hundred. The theory draws on two earlier ideas: the coma theory and the Springfield as outside time and space theory, but adds a specific claim. Homer's survival rate is not random good luck. It is the universe's active protection of a specific individual. Why Homer? Various candidate explanations. The God conversation in Homer the Heretic that we never hear the end of. The Stonecutter's identification of Homer as the chosen one. The cosmic implication of a show that has been following one particular man for its entire run. The universe of that show, by definition, organizes itself around his survival. The most satisfying version of this theory is the simplest one. Homer survives because the show needs him to, and the show's universe has internalized that need so completely that it has become a feature of the world rather than just a narrative convention. Homer is immortal because he's the main character. Springfield has decided to honor that. The Simpsons, like all cartoons, operates under a different set of physical laws than the real world. This is obvious and not itself a theory. The theory is about what kind of alternative physics Springfield runs on. Not random cartoon physics, arbitrary rules that allow anything. Emotional logic, specific and consistent. In Springfield, what happens is determined by what the story needs emotionally, not by what the laws of physics permit. Homer's car crashes when the scene needs to be funny, not when the road conditions require it. The food Marge cooks is always exactly sufficient for the number of guests. The Springfield Elementary School always has just enough budget to produce the plot event it needs to produce. The universe bends toward the story's emotional requirements. Good things happen when the story needs warmth. Bad things happen when the story needs consequence. The world is not random. It's attuned to the human experience it's trying to document, which, now I think about it, is what good fiction always does. Springfield just does it more transparently than most places. Season 8, You Only Move Twice. Hank Scorpio, voiced by Albert Brooks. An episode the show has never quite managed to top, partly because Scorpio is the most complete character it ever produced outside the regular cast. Scorpio is trying to take over the world. He does take over the east coast of the United States by the episode's end, which is rather more successful than most fictional villains manage. He is also, and this is the episode's central joke and its greatest achievement, a genuinely excellent employer. He knows his staff by name. He has a hammock program. He runs in a casual way that suggests he's thought carefully about creating a pleasant workplace. He gives Homer every resource he needs to succeed professionally. The theory is that Scorpio succeeded where virtually every other animated villain failed because he was competent, not just clever. Operationally, managerially, interpersonally competent. He didn't monologue, he delegated, he trusted his staff. He focused on outcomes. The joke is that the best employer Homer ever had was a global terrorist. The theory is that the show was making a point about competence, that genuine capability deployed consistently and generously can achieve things that spectacular villainy never manages, even if what you're achieving is the takeover of the American Eastern Seaboard. Matt Groening created both The Simpsons, 1989, and Futurama, 1999. Both shows have confirmed crossover references. Characters from one appear in the background of the other. The shows acknowledge each other's existence in ways that go slightly beyond simple Easter eggs. The theory is that these are not separate fictional universes. Futurama is set 1,000 years after The Simpsons, and the new New York of Futurama is built on the infrastructure, physical and cultural, of the world Springfield existed in. The evidence people cite certain background design elements that persist across both shows. The Professor Farnsworth and Professor Frink relationship. Both are absent-minded genius scientists in similar molds, and the theory suggests they might be in the same family line. The continuation of certain cultural patterns from Springfield era to Futurama era that suggest a common ancestral society. The emotional version of this theory, which I prefer, is simply that Groening built one world and populated two different corners of it. Springfield and New York are related the way any distant cousins are. The same family logic, the same underlying assumptions about humanity, separated by 1,000 years and a nuclear apocalypse or two. The alien duo appear in every treehouse of horror. They have been watching Springfield specifically and consistently for the entire run of the show. Their observations about humanity are not general. They are focused on this particular town, this particular family, this particular dysfunction. The theory is that Kang and Kodos are not opportunistic visitors. They are long-term researchers who have identified The Simpsons as the most representative specimen of human behavior they can find, and have been documenting them across the show's whole duration. What their research has concluded, if it has concluded anything, is not clear. The Treehouse episodes don't give them a resolution. They are always about to invade. They are always threatening, and they always, by the end of the Treehouse segment, fail to do anything definitive. The reading I find most charming is that Kang and Kodos keep showing up because they can't figure this family out. They have all the technology, they have the intelligence, they have the motivation, and they still can't explain why Homer Simpson does what he does or what the appeal of a Krusty Burger actually is. After all this time, they're still studying. They're no closer to an answer. We touched on this earlier, but I want to spend a bit more time here because I think the episode's theology is genuinely interesting and doesn't get enough careful attention. Bart sells his soul and loses the capacity to have his presence registered by the world. Automatic doors don't respond to him. Animals ignore him. The small, involuntary acknowledgments that the living world offers to other living things, the door that opens, the dog that looks up, stop happening. The soul in this reading is not a theological concept. It's a relational one. It's the thing that makes you legible to the world as a participant rather than an observer. Without it, you can move through space, but you can't make contact. And when Bart gets it back, when Lisa, who saved up money and bought it from the comic book guy and gave it to her brother for no other reason than that she loved him, he cries. He doesn't say anything. He just holds it and cries. The episode is about sincerity. Bart's whole persona is built on the performance of not caring. The sole storyline puts him through a literal experience of what not caring actually feels like. The cold, unwitnessed passage through a world that doesn't see you back. And he finds it unbearable. He cares. He always did. The episode just made him admit it. When the show removes its regular constraints, the reset, the tonal contract, the social rules of Springfield, the characters behave in ways that feel more like their essential selves. Homer in hell, still hungry, still primarily concerned with food, still looking for a way to optimize his immediate physical satisfaction despite the metaphysical scale of his situation. Bart with a devil, still negotiating, still trying to find the angle, still convinced there's a deal to be made even in supernatural contracts that are genuinely binding. Lisa in heaven, still worried about whether she deserves to be there, still anxious about her own worthiness, even in a context where the question should have been settled. The theory is that the treehouse segments, by removing the safety mechanisms, let the show tell deeper truths about its characters than the regular episodes can accommodate. Not because the regular episodes are dishonest, but because the regular episodes have obligations to comedy and continuity that the specials don't. When everything is permitted, the characters show you what they're made of. And they're made of exactly what you'd expect if you've been watching carefully. There's a specific quality to the way Springfield's geography fails to cohere. And I think it's worth naming precisely. It's not just that the maps are wrong, or that the writers weren't paying attention. It's that the geography behaves the way geography behaves in dreams. In a dream, you can walk out of your childhood bedroom and be in a school corridor and then suddenly in a forest. And none of these transitions feel wrong while they're happening. The logic isn't spatial, it's associative. You go from one place to the next because something connects them emotionally, not because they're adjacent. Springfield moves the same way. The beach is close when the beach matters to the story. The mountains are near when the mountains are needed. The forest is accessible exactly when someone needs to get lost in it. The town's geography reorganizes itself around what the episode requires, the same way a dream reorganizes space around what the dreamer needs to encounter. This is different from the childhood memory reading we talked about earlier, which is about how people misremember places after the fact. This is about the structural logic of the place itself. The possibility that Springfield's impossible coherence is the coherence of a place that's always been slightly dreamed rather than drawn, which would explain a great deal about why nobody who lives there seems to find it strange. Alf Clausen scored The Simpsons for 27 seasons before being replaced by a smaller budget operation in season 29. In those 27 seasons, he produced one of the most sophisticated orchestral catalogs in television history. The theory is that Clausen's scores were doing something the visual comedy above them was occasionally not doing, carrying the emotional truth of the scene in a register that the comedy couldn't sustain without becoming maudlin. When Homer does something that would, in a realistic register, be devastating, and the visual comedy plays it for laughs, the score sometimes doesn't quite follow. It stays in a minor key slightly longer than the joke requires. It uses instrumentation that's warmer or sadder than the punchline earns. The theory is that Clausen was, deliberately or instinctively, acknowledging the emotional weight of the show's better moments in music, even when the script and animation were obliged to deflect it with comedy. The two Simpsons running simultaneously, the comedy on screen and the emotional register in the score, are the reasons certain episodes feel like more than they should. Santa's Little Helper has, across the show's run, reacted to off-screen events before The Simpsons did, has found hidden objects, has behaved in ways that suggest information he shouldn't have, has, on at least 3 occasions, done something that prevented a worse outcome in ways that required him to know things. The theory is that the show's animals are operating with full awareness of the situation and have simply decided not to intervene more than minimally. They watch, they understand, they occasionally nudge things in the right direction, and then they go back to sleeping and eating and performing the role of household pets because that's the arrangement they've settled into. Snowball II is more enigmatic. She arrived after her predecessor's death and has been present at 742 Evergreen Terrace ever since. Her awareness is harder to document than Santa's little helpers, but there are moments. The light version of this theory is that it's just a charming way to explain occasional pet-adjacent gags that involve more narrative timing than is strictly plausible. The more interesting version is that the Simpson house has 2 permanent witnesses who have seen everything and chosen silence, and we never find out what they'd say if they chose otherwise. Treehouse of Horror 5 Pokinazin. Season 6. Homer travels through time using a toaster and keeps making things catastrophically worse by interfering with the past. The episode established that the show's universe is capable of temporal alteration and that Homer specifically is capable of causing it. The full version of the theory connects several earlier ideas. Homer's coma theory, theory number 2, posits that he's been in a dream state since season 4. The Springfield outside time theory, theory number 15, establishes that the town doesn't follow normal temporal rules. And the reset by design theory, theory number 20, notes that Springfield returns to baseline after every disruption. The theory pulls these together. Homer, from his coma state, has been unconsciously applying the temporal mechanics established in Treehouse 5 to restore his preferred timeline after each episode's chaos. The reset is not institutional, it's personal. It's Homer, at some level below consciousness, insisting on this particular life. His house, his family, his town, his bar, and correcting for any deviation. This makes Homer's apparently passive existence into something else. He is, in this reading, the most active agent in Springfield's maintenance. Not deliberately, not knowingly, but consistently and with total devotion to the specific shape of the world he wants to keep waking up in. Which is, I think, the most Homer thing that Homer could be doing. We're nearly at the end. A few final theories that feel less like conspiracies and more like things the show has been saying, quietly, underneath everything else. Homer Simpson has confronted his own death more times than any character in the show's history. Heart attacks, accidents, deliberate risks, near misses that should have been misses without the near attached. And he processes none of it. He wakes up, he makes a sandwich, he drives to Moe's, he goes back to work. The confrontation happens and is absorbed and the life continues. The theory is not that Homer is in denial. It's that Homer has reached a specific accommodation with mortality that he doesn't have the vocabulary to articulate, and the show represents this through the slapstick and the reset. He has understood at some level below language that the life he has is the life he has, and that treating each near death as a catastrophe would be a way of spending your life waiting for the catastrophe rather than living in the gaps. That's not wisdom exactly, it's not ignorance either. It's something Homer arrived at without trying to. The specific equanimity of a person who has stopped fighting the fragility of things and started just eating the donut. Whether that's beautiful or terrifying probably depends on what time of night it is when you think about it. The show has followed many plots across all its seasons. Burns and the Plant, Bart's adventures, Lisa's ambitions, Springfield's politics. But if you trace the emotional through line, the question the show keeps returning to, it's this one. Will Homer and Marge be okay? Every season puts the marriage under a new kind of pressure. Every season finds a reason for the reconciliation. And everything else is what happens while they're figuring that out. The Simpsons is funny, it was always funny first, and the satire operated through the comedy rather than alongside it. The jokes landed and people laughed and the episode ended and everyone went to bed. The theory is about what happened to the satirical content that was embedded in all those jokes. Burns blocking out the sun, the monorail, the broken school funding, the legal system that favors money, the civic corruption that everyone acknowledges and nobody fixes, the environment being cheerfully sacrificed for industrial convenience. These are not background details, they're arguments. The show has been making them continuously in the same Springfield across every season. And the measure of how well the satire worked is, by some readings, the degree to which none of it has changed. The monorail episode is the clearest case. It's a perfect piece of satire about how American municipalities can be sold on expensive, flashy, useless solutions to problems that require unglamorous maintenance. It aired in 1993. The dynamics it described are completely recognizable today. The show was right, has been right, and because it was funny, the rightness was metabolized as entertainment rather than as warning, which is, in itself, a warning about the limits of satire. William Faulkner built Yoknapatawpha County. He populated it with families and histories and locations and a shared mythology that accumulated over decades of fiction. The county became more real than many real places because of the completeness of its imagining. Charles Dickens built a London that was partly true and partly invented and wholly convincing. A London that exists in the cultural imagination as the definitive London, even for people who know perfectly well what the real city looked like. The theory is that Springfield belongs in this tradition, not because The Simpsons is high literature. It's an animated sitcom about a yellow family and a nuclear plant that's been running long enough to outlast several genuine literary movements, but because of what it has built. A geography, a social structure, an economy, a history that stretches back beyond the show's timeline through the characters' backstories. A mythology about what America is, and what it wants, and what it fears, and what it's willing to do to itself in the name of the things it loves. All of this assembled episode by episode across the show's whole life. That's not nothing. That's actually something very large, and I think it deserves the acknowledgement. Season 3, the episode often called Et tu, Brute? Maggie says her first word. She's alone with some other family members away from the primary scene. She says, Daddy. Homer isn't there. That's it. That's the whole theory. Maggie's first word was said for Homer in the direction of Homer at the moment of her greatest linguistic accomplishment. And Homer was somewhere else. The show presents this as a sweet, slightly bittersweet moment. It doesn't belabor it, doesn't require you to feel anything specific about it, it just puts it there. But the reading that stays with me is this. That single moment contains something that the show has been saying about Homer and his family across all its seasons. The love is real, the sincerity is complete, and it so often goes unseen. Not because Homer doesn't care, because Homer is Homer, and the world moves at his pace, and the things that happen around him tend to happen just outside his field of attention. The first thing Maggie ever said, she said for him. He never heard it. The show will end. Everything ends. At some point, a specific episode will be the last episode of The Simpsons, and then there won't be any more. The theory is that when that episode airs, most people won't recognize it in the moment. There won't be a dramatic announcement mid-episode. The couch gag will play. The Springfield establishing shot will run. The family will do something, and Homer will say something, and the credits will roll. And then, at some point later, weeks or months, it will be confirmed that that was the last one. And people will go back to it and look for the moment where it felt like a conclusion, and they won't quite find it. Because the show was never designed to have a conclusion. Every episode was made to continue. The ending, when it comes, will be as structurally similar to the middle as the beginning was. That's not a criticism, it's just the nature of what The Simpsons is. Some stories have conclusions, some stories stop. And the difference is only visible from outside, after the fact. The flip side. The show has been renewed through at least season 38. It's been on longer than most entertainment properties are even conceived of. Disney owns it and will continue to own it, and Disney has no incentive to end it because the show generates catalog revenue, streaming content, merchandise, and cultural ubiquity that would cost considerably more to replace than to maintain. So it will continue. Season after season, Homer and Marge and the kids in the same yellow house on the same street in the same impossible town, which cannot be located on any real map but exists in the mental geography of hundreds of millions of people. The philosophical question as to whether institutional continuation is a form of afterlife or a form of purgatory for a piece of art doesn't have a clean answer. The show in its current form is not what it was in Season 4 or Season 8. Most of us know that, but Springfield is still there. The couch is still there. The title sequence still plays. And there's something in that continuity, the fact that you can go back to it, that it's still making episodes, that the world is still operational, that functions as a kind of comfort. Whether that's beautiful or sad probably depends on the episode. A recognition theory to close this section. The Simpsons, at its best, is about a family that loves each other imperfectly and survives things that would be fatal in a realistic universe, and keeps showing up for each other anyway. That's the whole argument. It's in every episode that the show has ever been honest enough to make. Homer fails Marge and comes back. Marge loses herself occasionally and finds her way to who she is. Bart and Lisa argue and then need each other. Maggie watches. Abe remembers things nobody else will ever understand. The disasters are real, financially, professionally, domestically, and they don't destroy anything permanently. Not because the show is unrealistic about life's capacity for damage, but because the show is committed to an argument that the ordinary, imperfect, yellow-tinted, donut-adjacent life is worth something. That it contains love, that the love, even expressed badly, is real. That's not a small thing to have been saying throughout its whole run. It's actually a very large thing. And the animated format, and the comedy register, and the cartoon physics, and the yellow skin are all just the vehicles it's been said in. Here's the last one. Homer Simpson is lazy, he is selfish, he is impulsive and frequently unkind and occasionally cruel in the small, unconsidered way that people are cruel when they're not paying attention to the people around them. He has hurt Marge by not seeing her. He has failed Bart by not showing up. He has failed Lisa by not understanding what she needs. He has made every mistake available to a person of his particular type, and has made most of them multiple times, and the show loves him unconditionally, without requiring him to improve. That's the theory. That the secret of The Simpsons, the reason it has endured this long, the reason it has been watched by hundreds of millions of people in dozens of languages, the reason it still generates something resembling genuine feeling even in its weaker later seasons, is this specific argument running underneath every other story it has ever told. You don't have to be good to deserve to be loved. You have to be real. Homer is real. He is constitutively, uncomplicatedly, completely real. His desires and his failures and his capacity for sudden, surprising love, all of it real. None of it performed or managed or presented to the audience for approval. And somehow, across 36 years and over 700 episodes and every format of media known to mankind, that has always been enough. 100 theories. Some of them true, probably. Some of them almost certainly not. A few of them interesting in ways that have nothing to do with whether they're accurate. The Simpsons has been there for a long time now. Long enough that the people who grew up watching it have children who are growing up watching it. Long enough that it's become part of the furniture of English-speaking culture in a way that very few things become. And underneath the yellow skin and the cartoon physics and the Springfield that can't be found on any map, there's just a family, imperfect and persistent, showing up for each other in the limited, affectionate, frustrating way that families do. That's what all the theories are really pointing at, I think. Not conspiracies, not cosmologies, not the hidden architecture of a fictional universe. just the question of what it means to love people who are difficult in a world that doesn't make it easy for a very long time. The Simpsons has been asking that question since 1989. It hasn't answered it yet, which might be why it's still